Welcome to IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Welcome to another great episode here at IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Cherokee Boose. In this episode, we're going to be continuing our Project Plus from CompTIA. Specifically, we'll be looking at how to select and use appropriate communication methods. With us today, we have Mr. Ronnie Wong. Thank you for being here today, Ronnie.
Well, thank you for having me on the show as we continue on with our CompTIA Project Plus and taking a look at those different communication methods. And there's a lot of different aspects of communications we definitely need to cover. So we better get started, Cherokee.
So Ronnie, how did we make it our entire lives without someone teaching us how to go ahead and communicate?
Well, that's actually a great question. When you start to actually think about something like that, you tend to naturally communicate, and what you would believe, right, is that we don't need any additional help in terms of communication because all of us have naturally communicated our entire lives, and we should be good at it already. But the very fact is, we may be good at some of it, but we may not be good at everything that we actually need to understand, especially in terms of project management and the communication there. So that's why we want to take a look at some of these different methods and talk about when they're really appropriate for us to actually use.
And not to mention that these are specifically called out by CompTIA on the objectives list, and that's what we're here for, is to go over the objectives. So that's what we're going to go ahead and do.
There's no doubt. So let's go ahead and just begin with foundational communications at the beginning, and then we'll take a look at why we need these methods and when we're actually going to use them as well. So if we take a look at my computer screen here, this is not a formal communications class in terms of what everything breaks down into. This is Ronnie Wong's version of it. So normally when you talk about the idea of communications, we're working from left to right as you see them. So normally what happens, of course, is an individual starts off and they have an idea that they need to communicate. And what that formulates in their mind is something that we would call a message, is what would end up happening. Now that formulation, once we get it to that point where it's a message within our minds, then we have to be able to communicate that particular message to whomever we want to. Okay? Now, once we have that originator of that message that needs to get across somebody, we expect that whoever we tell that to or write it to or send some type of message to, whether it's light signals in terms of Morse code or anything, we hope that they actually understand the true intent of the way that we thought about it in our minds, okay, at the very beginning. So at that particular point then, we might actually just yell it out, right? So we might use something like this, a little horn, well, not exactly that, but you kind of get the idea. You might use a voice message. You might use any of these other methods that we actually have right here that we've listed to talk about: social media, fax, email, you name it, regular snail mail, telephone call, chat, instant messaging, whatever you want to do. You might have all of those different types of communication methods that are actually available to you. But the key here is choosing which one's actually appropriate. And the problem that you have then is not that the message can't be communicated in a literal fashion, nor, not that the message you can't actually yell out, but the problem is the understanding. So normally we have a sender, we have a particular communication that we end up using, and then we have receivers on the other end, okay? Now, in that particular idea of different receivers, it could be an individual, it could be a group of people, whatever it might be, the problem that you might see is that some of these people might get the message exactly the same, okay? Others, they hear the message, but it's not exactly the same, and others may even hear a different message than what you chose to communicate. And you might wonder, like, why in the world is that true? Why does that happen? Well, there are many barriers, okay, which is what this particular pink or purple line, it depends on how you look at this. This particular line represents is that there are many barriers that can happen, regardless of which method that you choose, that may end up emphasizing the wrong part of the message, or may not emphasize enough of the message, or may completely change the message. And that's why we need to take a look at those different possibilities in terms of methods that we have to use to ensure that whatever we communicate can get through, okay? So when it comes down to it, let's just take for an example some of the different things that we normally have to do in terms of project management. The big one essentially are meetings, okay? Now, Cherokee, I've already expressed to you during our show at some point in Project Plus here that as far as meetings go, I really don't like having meetings if I do not have to be a part of a meeting. I really do not want to be in a meeting. But in project management, we have things like kickoff meetings, right, that really kind of get the show rolling the way that we want to. We also end up having in-person meetings, maybe with project sponsors and other stakeholders that we have to have. And those particular types of in-person meetings may be virtual, or they may actually be meetings that we set up so that we come together and we talk about all those different things as well. There's also, of course, times where those meetings are not actually scheduled out as far as meetings go, but they're fairly impromptu. It might be as you're actually on your way out to go and attend another meeting. I know it's kind of strange that you do this, but somebody stops you in the hall. Cherokee goes, oh, can I just bug you for a moment here and let's talk about something? And all of a sudden you actually started talking about what had to happen there, and that was kind of an impromptu meeting that you actually see. And you even have closure meetings, and you have so many meetings that are going on. And the hardest part about those meetings is to ensure that whatever message that needs to communicate gets through to the receiver, and it's the same as much as possible. Okay? But in the 21st century today, we have so many different methodologies out there.
I know, we've really evolved.
Evolved is not the key. We've jumped insanely here to the point where we really have this unusual gap. You have people in project management that learned it in the 20th century, and they still follow the old tried and true method of their communication styles that they learned. They don't like this idea of actually saying, what do you mean I should use this instead of the way that I learned it? Okay? So you have people that essentially are going to be stuck to their way of actually communicating, and even though you don't tend to deal with it in that way, you've got to realize that communication method has to either get updated, or you have to actually find a method that's going to work for you as well. So we want to make sure that we actually addressed when it's actually appropriate to use some of these different ones that we actually saw kind of in symbolic form on my diagram here. All right. So Cherokee, let's just talk about probably the most common one right at the beginning for most organizations, which is the lifeblood of every communication that goes on within organizations here, which is the idea of email. Okay, and by far, that is probably still the most common version of some type of communication method. I've learned one thing in the IT industry over the years here, if nothing else, right? As long as you have printers working, and as long as people can get their email, everything else can pretty much fall apart. Okay, and that pretty much is the truth. Okay, but you allow for 5 minutes where they're expecting an email, and they don't get it, you're in trouble. You're going to hear about it. You allow for the fact that they can't print, you're going to hear about it.
Yep.
But overall, though, email is by far the kind of the lifeblood of most companies in terms of communication here. So when you start to talk about this idea of using email, okay, well, you got to think about what it is that you need to relay in an email. Okay, so in that sense, it's not the same as some of the other things that you have to be able to do. So an email message is good when you have to relay some details, okay? But it was primarily really designed so that you could communicate things fairly quickly, okay, with some documentation details. Now, it doesn't mean that you actually document fully everything, okay? But if that's your only method, you do. But a lot of times, it's usually about that. So much so that a lot of times people really, they shouldn't actually need to explain everything. They should just give highlights in those, because email is meant to be some type of quick messaging service as well. Okay? Now, the problem with the idea of working with email, though, is that it's what we call asynchronous communication. So Cherokee, I send you an email, okay, and I'm saying, I need a response to this quickly. Cherokee, what do you think I mean by quickly when I say that?
For the type of life that most of us live in this day and age, immediate.
Yeah, so Cherokee would think immediate, or she may actually think like some people I know that goes, it means when I can get to it, okay? so that means when I have the time, I may actually address Ronnie's question at this particular point, but it will be quicker than what? Than if Ronnie were to write to me in a letter and address it. But at this particular point, if it's something that's super elaborate, and this is what happens to me on emails a lot of times as well, is that when I get a question on email, if I can answer it in an email back in a relatively short amount of time, I will. But if I can't, then I'll probably just let it sit in my inbox until I go, all right, I can now sit down and actually answer this email, and all of a sudden I do write out quite a long email. But the problem is it actually does take more time, and so if it takes more time, and I'm now awaiting an answer, it may not be the best possible method of communication. So we need to understand our purpose in using the email as well. Okay? Now, sometimes it really does work well in terms of at least distributing information to a large group of people very quickly. Okay?
Yes.
Yeah, changes that might happen, like you go, oh, I scheduled this on the wrong day. Let me make sure everybody knows about it. Well, I would either have to get on the phone, okay, and call everybody that needed to be addressed, or I might have actually created a distribution group at some point so that I can say, all right, here's an email that needs to go out to everybody at this point. So here at IT Pro TV Studios, as the studios were getting built, when we actually needed access into the building, well, the great thing is whoever the project manager was on site at that point, he's a great guy. If we actually if there were any changes that were going on that we needed to be aware of as we were working in the building, he just sent out an email saying, hey, here's where the doors are going to be open, here's who's coming in today, and it actually allowed us to understand we needed to make room for that, and he sent that out to essentially all the contractors, which was kind of neat. So you do have those things that are actually really good that provide a basic amount of information, but remember, just because we use it that way, it doesn't mean that you can't use it for much more detailed and even much more formal communication. But at the same time, it's something that in terms of project management, if time is your key, the email is probably not going to be your best bet because not everybody treats email the same way. When I think it's instantaneous, that can mean exactly like I told you, is that Cherokee may mean when I can get to it, okay? And Cherokee may have 1,000 emails in her box for all I know, and there it is. And she's like, I'm answering, Ronnie's at number 997. So, and she answers it from the top to the bottom. She doesn't care that I actually put the word urgent in the subject line. She's just going through one by one, and she's on number 80.
I don't want to jump the gun here, but I think if you really want to get a hold of me and it's really that urgent, email probably wouldn't be the best. Here at IT Pro, we use Office 365, and instant messaging would probably be the way to go.
Yeah.
It just jumps the head of the line there.
Yeah, now you've actually brought up an interesting idea here in terms of instant messaging. Instant messaging is a great way to go, but there's limitations to that as well, okay? When you start talking about something like that, email is fairly universal. In other words, just about everybody. And I'm not going to say please don't say I don't use email. Please don't write in a letter to IT Pro TV and say Ronnie said everybody has email. I'm still using pen and paper. Fine, that's great. But overall, though, right, it's fairly universal. Now, what I mean by that, right, is usually everybody has one. It's like a phone number. Everybody just about has a phone number. But at the same time, it doesn't require you and I to be on the same system.
Right.
So Cherokee, if you have, for one reason or another, I don't know why you would still have this, if you have an AOL.com email address, and I have a Gmail address or something even sillier, if I have something like that, it doesn't matter that our systems are disparate, okay? It really doesn't matter at all because an email is fairly generic, so I can send it to you, and every company that we end up working with, they may actually have their own email server. They may use something generic like Gmail or Yahoo or whatever it might be, and emails can be exchanged fairly quickly. But since Cherokee mentioned the idea of instant messaging, though, okay, now in this particular sense for a project management company, well, more than likely, it's like what Cherokee said. Here at IT Pro TV Studios, we use Office 365, which normally means we have access to Skype for Business, and so that's great, as long as you have access to Skype for Business as well. But Cherokee, what about my vendors that I have working on my project? And I go, I'm going to instant message you. And then they're going to say, okay, that's fine. And then I go, all right, so you have Skype for Business, right? I'm like, ooh, no, I work with Google Hangouts, okay? And now you're like, oh, yeah,
right.
that's not great. So instant messaging gives you that idea of almost near synchronous communication, which is awesome. But now you're actually requiring a system to be put in place. So as long as everybody has the same system, you're okay, and that's a great thing to have. But now if you actually have different systems, though, well, a little bit harder to actually get adjusted and to figure out and to realize that that's what also you have to deal with. Okay, so you may have some companies that go, no way, I'd never get Office 365, and you have companies that may say, I'm not going to get Google, Hangouts either. So in that sense, maybe the instant messaging, as quick as it gives you the information, the problem is you may find out they're not all compatible, okay? All right, so there's some other things that we also need to talk about as well, which is the idea of fax, okay? Fax is another type of methodology that we can use. Okay, so in this one, normally for us, the big idea here, okay, and the big reason why today in the 21st century we'd probably end up using a fax is if there's a legal document that needs to be signed at some point, okay, so that gives authority to somebody else. Faxes, I believe, still hold some type of legal.
For sure.
Yeah.
You would think that it would be an antiquated system, but there are so many companies that they really rely on fax transmissions today.
Yeah, and a lot of times, the only limitation that you have here usually, and the reason why people give you their fax numbers is that either they prefer it, still to me kind of strange,
I know.
yeah, but it does happen.
Like, it's out there, yeah.
But it could be that they don't actually have internet access, and for most of us here at IT Pro TV Studios, we would probably we'd probably faint underneath that thought of not having access to the internet. So it could be though you are working with a company that really doesn't depend on the internet for their communication, and so they may go, no, we just never found a need for it. Everything that we need, we can work out over faxes. Okay. Well, if that's true, well, then you might still have to actually use a fax to help you to do something like this. Great thing is, since it does work over your telephone line, it's a fairly universal process for us to be able to do. But normally for us, as long as there's, probably today, if there's no other communication method available, we might end up using a fax. But most of us, though, are probably not going to consider this probably the best aspect of getting anything done. Okay? Now, that also means, of course, then everybody's trying to get to this point as well where it seems a bit impersonal, right? Everything that we've talked about, whether it's an email or a fax, you know, or even instant messaging, it's a little bit impersonal because the problem with those are fairly simple, okay? You don't understand tone. You can't see an inflection, or you can't hear, excuse me, an inflection in the voice. You can't see that frown that Cherokee just made when you say something silly. Yeah, you lose a lot of that process, and so that the message doesn't come through. Well, now that means, of course, you might think about in-person or actually some type of virtual type of conferencing, like video conferencing or even voice conferencing as well.
My favorite.
Yeah, so those things are great. Okay, they actually do kind of give you that reality that you can have on a face-to-face meeting that allows you to do everything that's actually there. And it also helps when you have team members that are actually incredibly remote at different locations instead of being right there in the room with you. So everybody can be involved, they can do that. But the limitation still is the same thing that we talked about with instant messaging. As long as you're on the same system, it works great. If you're on different systems, it doesn't work as well. And that doesn't mean you can't get everybody to be on the same system, but sometimes you might find out.
Yeah, there are a lot of free services, and now you don't even have to install the clients, the software. We use lightweight protocols. A lot of times you can just connect right there through the browser, so that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it really is, because it does allow you to do that, and the nice thing is it's fairly scalable. Okay, I was trying to make sure I remember the word. I was thinking scopable, and I was like, that's not the right word. It's scalable. And what does that mean? That means if my project continues to grow beyond just remote sites right here in Gainesville, and then we get another project site in Miami, we get one in New York, we get one in Los Angeles. Those virtual conference meetings, okay, we can continue to grow that without really needing to build up a ton of infrastructure to do so. So you do have scalability along with this type of system that's actually in place when you start doing that. Okay, and again, voice conferencing would be the same thing. As long as system's in place, we are ready to go. Okay. Now, there are sometimes, though, that the only method that we should ever use, okay, is going to be a face-to-face type of in-person meeting. Okay. Now, Cherokee, can you think of I know of at least one instance that I would say this should be done face-to-face. Do you have an idea of what I'm thinking about?
I want to be professional here, but due to some of our conversations, I have a feeling that it's probably a breakup.
Yeah, that would probably be a good one.
Or am I just totally in left field here?
No, you're fine. Yeah. If you actually receive an email or an instant message like, okay, I'm done, that's probably a little bit harsh. But in a professional sense, I was thinking of you're fired.
Okay. Yeah, that would work too. Yeah, that's kind of a breakup there.
Don't get me wrong. I guess you could get that over an email. I know people have in the past, but when it comes down to it, right, there are some times in which, the impersonal nature of something like that should never be the reason why people get upset. They're probably upset about losing their job, but they should know, and it should come from somebody directly. So when you need to make the actual impact so that somebody understands that There's no appeal of this. There's nothing else going on here. This is just the way this is. You want to make sure that you go ahead and that you do that. Now, the limitations here is fairly simple, okay? That means you have to actually be willing to be there, okay? So if you're going to do this type of thing, it means you have to be willing to fly out to wherever, or you have to bring them to where you are. So you might find out it's not really going to be that way all the time. But just realize that there are a lot of things that happen. Whenever you have some type of major disruption to your project, if you can, face-to-face is probably going to be better than the idea of them just receiving an email like, oh, by the way, your particular task on the project has been canceled. Love, Ronnie. That's kind of harsh at the same time. So face-to-face meetings do have their place, and they should, they shouldn't be replaced just because there's conveniences that are out there. When it's actually very important, face-to-face meetings are pretty much the big one. Okay.
Maybe even for some kind of really secure information transmission as well. Unless we're dealing with quantum encryption, that's probably a pretty safe method.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that particular aspect of security, but yes, it could be where the message does need to be for your eyes only, and that could be it. So hopefully we're not communicating anything like that on my project, because then I'd be part of some spy ring to get arrested by the country. There you go. Oh, Michael Weston, yeah, burn notice guy. All right, of course, text messaging. You hate to say something, today it's kind of a de facto way of us communicating. And
really?
So just about. It's fairly de facto way that we tend to communicate within companies. We can relay information fairly quickly. It's fairly informal, and most of the time the people that you tend to text are not strangers. I hope. Cherokee's looking at me like, I don't know. Yeah, most of the time they're people that you know, so you feel confident.
I have a handful of people that I text, and I keep it pretty limited, yeah.
Well, but that's the idea, right? Text messaging, you don't tend to, I say this, okay? You don't tend to go out and go, oh, there's somebody across, this, let's say a grand opening that you want to meet. You don't go, let me see if I can text them and get together.
But then there are other people, experts, like Miss Erin here at IT Pro TV. The other day, she sent someone a text message, and I blinked, and she had already sent it. I was just floored. I said, wow, that's so fast. She's like, yeah, I have a lot of practice.
Yeah, no, when you're text messaging, you're assuming, you can make this type of assumption. Normally the people that you text message, they already know how you speak. They kind of get the inflection that you would say things with, but strangers don't. So even though, Cherokee, we can use emojis, which I know is one of your favorites here. We can use emojis to communicate. But when you start doing stuff like that during a formal project management meeting, it's probably not going to actually
probably not, Ronnie.
Not going to carry over
the emojis
intent.
at home.
Yeah, keep the emojis on the personal level. But you kind of get the idea that as well as it does work, as long as people understand the background of it is perfectly fine. But most of the time, in a formal meeting, especially with people that you don't know, you lose so much in the communication that's not going to work. If you know the people, it's probably going to work better, okay? Now, there also, of course, comes the idea of just written reports, okay? Now, this is the one that most of us probably groan at, like, a report? Are you joking me? They hand you a stack of papers like I handed Cherokee this morning for our show, and she's like, oh, no, Ronnie is going to be talking a lot, is what she said. So there you go, okay? But written reports, they are still valid, okay? Now, with this one, this is not even asynchronous communication here, Cherokee. This is just a broadcast, okay?
That's right.
If I give you a report, I'm not expecting you to come back to me and go, hey, I have a question about this report. I'm just saying, I don't care. You're getting the report. You can read all about it on your own. And if you have questions later, make sure you get a hold of me. But I'm essentially just going to do that. So you kind of are able to distribute a mass amount of information very quickly, okay? And the great thing is in reports you can be as detailed as you choose to be as well, but you normally don't need any collaboration to ensure that the message gets through. You know exactly what you want to communicate and you communicate that through. So we tend to see this when we have the project manager giving status reports. We tend to see this when we actually have things like our annual report that we may give or weekly report here that shows that progress is also going on too. Okay. Now, the last one that we need to talk about here just briefly is the use of social media,
Oh,
okay,
brother.
in project management. I know it's kind of
know.
strange, but in the 21st
And look, and
century.
James in the
Yep.
chat, he even says people have gotten fired over Twitter. It's
Yeah.
so crazy to think that it's such an integral part of our lifestyles now that it is. It actually just kind of carries right on over into our professional lives.
It really does, right? The very fact that that people have actually read your own Facebook post or Twitter message and said, yeah, we don't think you're a part of our company, goes to show you the sensitivity of the communication that you use, and maybe that expression itself, and that's why we're talking about using the appropriate method.
Right.
Maybe you actually, before you say something that you want to say, really, maybe you go, you know, maybe me posting some type of grudge that I'm having with my boss on Twitter is not the way to do that, okay?
Yeah.
But maybe me actually going to my boss, who I have a grudge with, maybe that's actually the better idea to do that.
Yeah, and
that
in case you
face-to-face.
guys missed it, we did have an episode on conflict resolution.
That's true. Yes, we did. So make sure you check that one out too. But you got to kind of understand that, especially in today's world, that for us, it is the idea social media tends to carry through to every part of our lives, and even in project management. This is a bit of more enhanced type of communication, okay, that's going to be used on channels that are established for us already. So things like Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter and stuff like that. All these are actually very valuable tools to the business world, okay? Advertisement, they do a ton of it, but remember that this gives you that mass media type of communication, reduces your effort of needing to coordinate when everybody just tends to be on Facebook anyways, and then you can actually put your message out there. Also, the other notion of using something like this helps out in project management a lot. On LinkedIn, there are plenty of project management groups out there where you might actually encounter something that you're saying, I'm dealing with this, and you'll probably find professionals willing to help. So it becomes a resource for you as well. Fairly cost efficient, because like on Facebook, I don't think it costs you very much to get on Facebook
Costs
as
you
far as I know.
privacy.
Yeah, privacy, but in terms of actual money, monetary costs, not really that way.
Yeah, and you guys would, and again, I hate to be a Debbie Downer, but from the security standpoint, you need to keep that consideration as well. You're not in charge of the types of encryptions that are being utilized, so you definitely don't want to use these channels for sensitive information.
Yeah, and lastly, the idea here is also kind of a little bit more unusual. Don't get me wrong, there's people out there that are on Facebook probably 23 and a half hours a day. I am not. So this is kind of an asynchronous type of communication, fairly passive. Most of the time where you go, oh, I'm going to post something that I think's funny, and nobody likes your post, and you feel kind of bad about it. I know, because I do that every day, and nobody really even likes them. So when you do stuff like that, people are,
I'm there. I feel you. Yeah.
So you got to realize this
Working on
is
it.
passive. It's not going to be what you think is going to be sometimes. So just realize that this is now a very heavily used communication method. And we tend to do this for announcements more than anything else, not trying to relay detailed information. One of the funniest things I saw recently is somebody said, hey, I need so-and-so to call me, and they actually posted their phone number, and they're like, ooh, great idea,
Yeah.
right there on Facebook.
I don't
So,
think they would be too pleased.
yeah, they have what they call trolls today, right? Which would simply, troll everybody for, or that particular person by a million people doing things. So just kind of realize that there's a lot out there.
There is a lot out there. There's really so much. And actually, James just put in the chat here again, Hootsuite, okay? There's so much. I get confused sometimes. You got to go to this website, log in. What's your password for this website? We've got Instagram. We've got Facebook. But whenever you can use a product like that just kind of bundles everything together, I don't even know. Ronnie, do we have a Yammer here at IT Pro TV?
We do not have Yammer, so that's like an internal Facebook type of
Good. I have too
system
many.
that you that you have access and available to. So there's a lot of different things here. Okay. Now the key though is you as a project manager. Okay. When it comes down to your communication plan, you do need to make sure that you understand the methods that are out there and that are available to you. But you can't just rely on one method. The problem is barriers that we've talked about. Let's go back to my diagram here for a second before we close up here. Okay. Remember that even though some people may have access to the systems that you want, some of them may, and that's a barrier. Okay, the very fact that they aren't going to do that, and that means they may not even get the message, okay, that you're actually trying to do. But there are some people that will actually read something without understanding your tone and your inflection, and then kind of think that they take it personally because they believe that they know you, And so that is a limitation behind some of these methods as well. The other one, of course, is when you start taking a look at the technology side of things, does it actually require a system to be in place or doesn't it? These are all different things that we have to actually think about as we establish a communication plan with our team so that they understand what it is we're trying to communicate. So normally once you actually do that, that's when you start choosing like your formal methods of communication of saying, you'll receive a written report, at this particular date or during this point in our project here, okay? Or regular status updates will come through email messages that will happen on a daily basis or on a weekly basis, okay? General announcements that have to do with, let's say, not scheduling, but time off may come through our Facebook post on our project, okay? So check there to find out stuff. And I mean, schools have actually done very good at something like this, where like inclement weather, delays or whether, because of some type of inclement weather.
Doctor's offices,
yeah, doctor's offices and stuff like that.
Calls, yeah.
Yep. Where they're actually able to use that system because it's already there. Why not take advantage of it? Well, companies are starting to do that as well. So there always has to be an understanding that you really need to understand how you're going to communicate and what you're going to communicate over these particular methods here, and choose the right one is going to be key. And so if you keep in mind that communication factor and understand who you're also trying to communicate with, hopefully it'll be easier for you to decide which of these methods you're going to end up using for your project management.
All right, I think that about wraps it up, but I do have one other question. Ronnie, do you have a Twitter account? What is your Twitter handle?
Yeah, mine is Ronnie underscore ITProTV.
Mine's Cherokee underscore at ITProTV.
There you go.
So guys, follow us on Twitter if you want to stay up to date. I think, Ronnie, you did a really great job explaining all the different communication methods. Now I know where to use them. So stay tuned, guys. We're going to have more Project Plus coming your way. Thank you for joining us. I'm Cherokee Boos.
And I'm Ronnie Wong.
Signing off. Have a good one.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.